we did Cain and Abel, and then next in the story would come Noah, and we did Noah back in the summer, and we do have the movie Noah, so if some of you want to watch it downstairs in the library, you can check that out. And then after that comes the Tower of Babel. We cover that at the story of Pentecost. So today we are starting the story of Abram. Abram is probably the most formative figure in all of the Hebraic faiths because he is the founder of 3 major world religions: Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. As you'll learn in these next couple weeks, Abram had 2 sons. Ishmael is the one from which the Muslims find their heritage, and Isaac, from which Judaism and then eventually Christianity finds its heritage. So it's very important to understand the story about Abram and Sarai, because when we learn their story, we see it forms the foundation of our faith. So as we go through these next several weeks, I want you to pay attention to what happens in their story and the relationships that they have with each other and with the people around them, because that helps us to understand our relationship with each other and with God. Now, we have to understand the context in which Abraham finds himself. Now, he starts out in the land of Ur, which is far away from the promised land, the land of Canaan. It's over on the other side of the Fertile Crescent in the land of Iraq, in that area. And he is how old? How old is Abram when God calls him? Anybody remember from the readings? 75, very good. A 75-year-old man called by God to make a journey across a desert with his wife and his possessions? Is God crazy? A 75, how many of you, when you're 75, or maybe when you were 75, would have wanted to pack up all your possessions, travel on foot or maybe with some camels and donkeys across a desert, not knowing what you were going to find, but only going on God's word that this is where I want you to go? Anybody would have been willing to do that? Not too many. I can imagine Abram having an internal dialogue with himself. Now, I'm not 75 years old. I've got about 30 years till I get there. But I have ministered to lots of people in that age range. And just from my conversations with them, I can imagine what they might say if God came to them and said, listen, I've got a wonderful journey for you to undertake. If I were Abraham, I would be saying, you know what, God, I'm pretty comfortable where I am. This is my rocking chair where I sit in every night, and I watch the evening news, and this is my side table where I put my glasses before I go up to bed, and that's my bed. That's where I sleep. I'm very comfortable on my bed. And in the morning when I get up, there's the daily item, and I read that every morning to make sure that I'm still alive. And then I have my routine, God, and I really don't want to leave my house. This is my home. This is where I children. This is where my grandchildren come to visit me. God, I am retired. Not only that, I'm just plain tired. I do not want to take this journey, God. Go find somebody younger, somebody who's got more strength, more vigor, somebody who's not me. But that's not what Abram says. Abram maybe had a restlessness in his soul. Maybe there was something in Abram that all his life he knew he was destined for something more. He didn't know what it was, but he felt all his life a yearning for something different than the life that he had. He and his wife Sarai. They didn't have any children, so they didn't have any excuse. They couldn't say, well, you know, God, I got to take care of my grandchildren. They didn't have any children. And this was a tragedy for them, because if you did not have any children, You had nobody to inherit all of your possessions, nobody to take care of you in your old age, and you had nobody to carry on your legacy. So he's feeling very dissatisfied with his life, and he's restless. And so when God comes to him and says, Abram, I want you to leave your home, pack up your possessions, and go to this land that I will show you, and I will give you children and grandchildren and generations you cannot even fathom. Abram says, let's go. I'm ready for an adventure, Lord. And that's what he does. Sometimes we get too comfortable in our situations. We get too content. When God is trying to push us on a new adventure, sometimes God is calling us to take a step forward in faith, not knowing where we may be ending up, but asking us to trust God that no matter where this journey may lead us, God is going to be there, and that there is something wonderful waiting at the end of the journey. Now, this is not to say that Abram didn't have his doubts along the way. The second reading that Bob read for us has Abraham. Now, he's in this land, and God has said, this is the land that I'm going to give you to possess. But Abraham is a little concerned because he's held up his end of the deal. He's packed up his things, and he's left, and he's made this arduous journey. And here he's in this land where nobody knows him. He's a stranger, and he still doesn't have any children. And he's starting to think that maybe God has not kept up his end of the deal. And so there's a conversation between Abram and God. One of many conversations that Abram has, as you'll see in Genesis. But Abram says, what are you doing here? You brought me to this place. I still don't have any children. I still don't have this land. How am I to know that maybe I'm not crazy or that you're crazy and you've sent me on a goose chase here? And what God does seems very strange to us, but there's an ancient primitive ritual that happens in ancient times where they take animals, the 3 rams and the 3 heifers, and they cut them in 2. They put the pieces out on the ground. And in this ancient primitive ritual, it's a way to make a covenant with someone, a promise to someone. When we make a promise, remember when you were a kid, you would say, cross my heart, hope to die, stick a needle in my eye. Right, okay. So this is, in essence, a way of saying this in ancient times. Basically, the 2 parties would walk between the 2 halves of these dead creatures saying, I am making a promise. And if I don't keep up my promise, may I end up like these dead animals. Cross my heart, hope to die, stick a needle in my eye, or may I end up like these animals. It is an ancient custom. It seems primitive to us, but for Abram, when he sees this fire pass over these pieces, he knows that God is making a promise to him. And a promise from God isn't just words. A promise does something to somebody. A promise is performative. It creates faith and trust inside of us. Because when God makes a promise, it's as good as done. When God makes a promise, God always keeps God's promises. So when Abraham has this vision and he sees the Spirit of God moving over this ancient ritual, these animals, he knows God is going to make this happen. And God takes Abram out and has him look up at the stars. Did anybody see the stars last night? Anybody look up at the stars? Wasn't it beautiful? It was gorgeous. And I stood last night and I looked up at the stars. And I tried to do what Abram did. I tried to count. And then there were so many of them, I got started to get blurry-eyed. And God said to him, your descendants will outnumber the stars, Abram. Even though you don't have any children right now, I promise you that you will have so many descendants, you won't even be able to count them even if you try. Now we stand where we are thousands and thousands of years later, and we know that indeed God made good on that promise. Because from Ishmael and from Isaac, thousands upon millions upon billions of people over the generations, God kept that promise to Abram. So when God comes knocking at your door and asks you to take on a task or take on a journey, you can be sure that God is going to be with you and keep that promise to accompany you every step of the way. Maybe God is calling you in your old age to move like Abram did. And maybe that's a scary thought. Maybe you'd rather just stay where you are, where you're comfortable and when you're content. But maybe God is saying to you, you know what? I'm going to take you to a place, a land that I will show you. And yes, you'll be a newcomer. And yes, you will not know everybody. But I promise that there is something wonderful waiting for you there. Don't be content with being content. Trust me, says God. Or maybe there's a new job that you're being offered. Or maybe you're thinking of taking on a responsibility that you had not expected. And all of a sudden, it's like God is just plopping this in your lap and saying, I'm calling you to this new task. Will you trust me that I'll be with you every step of the way? We know that God is faithful because tonight, when you go outside and you look at the stars, I want you to do what I do with the youth every time we have time at RB Winter. What do we do, guys, when we go out on the beach? We stand out, and what do we look at? The stars. And I have them find a star and focus on that star. I want you to imagine the next time you look at the stars, imagine Abraham looking up and seeing one of those stars and thinking, one of those stars is me. You are a descendant of Abraham. You are one of the children of God. You are a promise kept. You are part of the constellation that God promised to Abraham thousands and thousands of years ago. Doesn't that blow your mind? That when Abraham looked up at the stars, one of those that he saw was you, and you, and you. You are a kept promise. You are a blessing. And now you are being called to be a blessing to others, to live out your life in a way that people can look at you, and when you're taking on a medical issue that has suddenly been plopped in your lap, when you're being asked to take on a relationship that you had not anticipated, when you are being asked to take on a responsibility, you can trust that God is blessing you so that you can be a blessing to others. We still do an ancient ritual. It's called baptism. And some people look at it as something very primitive, where we take some water and we splash it on the baptismal candidate's head. But we know in this ritual that God promises, no matter where you go, no matter what you do, I am with you every step of the way. When we take on a relationship in marriage, we have two people walk down the aisle, as we did when Justin and Nicole walked down the aisle just last week, when Tanya and Devin walked down the aisle a couple of weeks ago. It's an ancient, primitive ritual, but it's saying, I'm making a covenant with you, and I promise to walk with you every step of the way. God promises to walk with you no matter what you're facing, no matter what you're going through. You are being blessed so that you can be a blessing to others. And so I say to you, let the adventure begin. Amen.